I was the one up at 3 a.m. feeding our son while she was sleeping next to me. Or so I thought. The man she was hiding had been calling me buddy for months. Then a routine medical form revealed something that destroyed the last wall I had left standing. My name is Clark Grimsby. I'm 41 years old. I work remotely as a cloud architect for a mid-sized tech firm out of Seattle. Good money, flexible hours, no commute. My wife, Norma, is 35. We've been married for 5 years when everything came apart. Our son Caleb was 9 months old at the time. We lived in a 2-story house in Denver, Colorado, a real neighborhood. Oak trees, sidewalks, the kind of place where people wave at each other in the mornings. Norma worked in marketing for a commercial real estate firm downtown. Good job, solid salary. She left by 8, came home whenever she felt like it. Some nights I was 6:30. Other nights, 9:15. I stopped asking after a while because the answers were always the same. Late meeting, client dinner, traffic on I-25. Meanwhile, I was the one at home. I want to be clear about something because I already know how it sounds. I wasn't just sitting around while my wife paid the bills. I was pulling in over $220,000 a year from my laptop. I managed cloud infrastructure for enterprise clients across 3 time zones. I took calls at 6 in the morning and sometimes again at 10 at night. And in between all of that, I was the one feeding Caleb his cereal, reading him the same 4 board books until I had them memorized, loading him into the car for every single pediatric appointment. I was running on 3, maybe 4 hours of sleep most nights, and I did it without complaint because that was the deal we made, and I believed in keeping my word. What I didn't know was that Norma had quietly stopped believing in the same thing. That Tuesday in October, I remember it clearly. Caleb had finally gone down around 10:15 after 45 minutes of fussing. I was still at my desk, finishing a system migration report when I heard the front door. Norma came in, dropped her bag by the stairs, and headed straight for the shower. She always showered before bed. Nothing unusual there. But when she slid under the covers 20 minutes later, something felt different. The air in the room felt different. I closed the laptop and lay down beside her. She was on her side, facing away. I reached over and put my hand on her shoulder. Just a simple, quiet gesture, the kind married people make without thinking. She flinched. Not a big movement. Just a quick, involuntary pull away from my hand, like she'd been startled out of something. She covered it fast, shifting and murmuring that she was tired. But I'd felt it. That half-second of recoil lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and I thought about all the times over the past few months she'd been just slightly out of reach. The dinners where she was on her phone more than she was in the room. The weekends where she seemed restless, like our house was a place she was only visiting. The way she laughed differently when she talked about certain people from work. One name had come up more than the others lately. Julian Steele. I knew Julian. I'd recommended him for a contract position at my firm 8 months ago. He'd reached out through LinkedIn, said he was looking for a foot in the door, and I put in a good word because that's what decent people do. He'd gotten a role. Ever since then, he was on the same internal Slack channels as Norma's contacts, attending some of the same vendor events, moving in the same professional orbit. He called me buddy on video calls. Every single time. Hey Clark, how's it going, buddy? I stared at the ceiling and felt something cold move through me. Not rage. Not yet. Just a quiet, terrible clarity, the kind that settles in when your body understands something your mind is still refusing to accept. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't confront Norma that night. I've thought about that decision 100 times since, and I still think it was the right call. Walking into a confrontation without anything solid in your hands is just noise. You give the other person room to maneuver, room to deny, room to flip it around and make you the problem. I wasn't going to hand her that, so I waited. The next 2 days, I paid attention in a way I hadn't in months. Not obvious attention. I didn't hover, didn't change my routine, didn't give her any reason to think something had shifted. I just watched. And once you start watching with clear eyes, you start seeing things you somehow missed before. She took her phone into the bathroom every single time. She angled the screen away when she typed. She laughed at something on it Wednesday afternoon while Caleb was napping. A short, bright laugh, the kind she used to aim at me. When I walked into the kitchen, the laugh stopped, and the phone went face down on the counter in one smooth motion. Thursday night, I got my answer. Caleb had woken up at 2:40 with a wet diaper and work himself into a full cry before I could get to him. I handled it, changed him, warmed a bottle, got him settled back down by 3:20. When I came back to bed, Norma hadn't moved. Dead asleep, or pretending. Her phone was on the nightstand, screen facing up. A notification banner lit up as I sat down on the edge of the mattress. I didn't reach for it immediately. I sat there for a moment, heart going at a steady, deliberate pace, the way it does when part of you already knows what's coming. Then I picked it up. The banner was from a contact saved as JS. Still thinking about tonight. You should have stayed longer. I read it twice. Then I opened the messages. She hadn't deleted them. That was the thing that got me. She hadn't even bothered. Maybe she thought I'd never look. Maybe she'd gotten sloppy. Either way, it was all there. Weeks of it. The kind of back and forth that doesn't leave much room for interpretation. Specific places, specific times, specific details that told me exactly what had been happening while I was at my desk running infrastructure deployments and getting up at 3 in the morning to feed our son. J.S. Julian Steele. The man I had recommended. The man I had vouched for. The man who had called me buddy on every team call for 8 months like we were old friends. Like he hadn't spent half that time building something with my wife behind my back. I set the phone down on a nightstand exactly where I'd found it. I didn't throw it. Didn't wake Norma up. I stood there in the dark bedroom, looked at my wife's sleeping face, and felt something inside me go very, very quiet. Not numb. I want to be precise about that. It wasn't numbness. It was the opposite. It was absolute, bone-deep clarity. I went back to my desk, opened a new document, and started writing down dates, times, and anything in those messages that could matter later. I wasn't thinking about what I felt. I was thinking about what I needed. By 5:30 in the morning, I had two things. A clear picture of how long this had been going on. At least 4 months based on the earliest messages I could find, and the name and number of family law attorney that Travis had mentioned offhand about a year ago. Travis Hale, my closest friend since college, had gone through a divorce of his own 3 years back. He'd told me his attorney was the kind of guy you wanted in your corner when things got ugly. I had a feeling things were going to get ugly. At 7, I texted Travis. Need to talk. Not a small thing. He called me back in 4 minutes. I gave him the short version, enough for him to understand the shape of it. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, low and steady, "Don't say a word to her yet. Not one word. Call Harding first." Harding. That was the attorney. Fletcher Harding. Family law, 15 years in Denver. I had an appointment scheduled by 9:15. When Norma came downstairs at 8 with wet hair and her work bag over her shoulder, I was at the kitchen table feeding Caleb his morning cereal. She poured herself a coffee, kissed the top of Caleb's head, gave me a quick, distracted smile, and said she'd probably be late again. "Okay," I said. She hesitated for just a second. Maybe she was looking for something in my expression, some sign that I found the message, some reaction she could manage. She didn't find anything. I kept my face neutral and gave Caleb another spoonful. She left at 8:12. I watched the door close behind her and then looked down at my son. He had cereal on his chin and was grabbing at the spoon with both hands, completely unbothered by the world. "It's going to be okay," I told him quietly. I wasn't sure yet if that was true, but I intended to make it true. Fletcher Harding's office was on the 14th floor of a building off 17th Street, downtown Denver. Clean waiting room, quiet receptionist, the kind of place that felt like it had seen every variety of human wreckage and still managed to stay composed about it. I liked that. Harding himself was in his early 50s, compact and direct, with the unhurried manner of a man who'd heard every story and couldn't be rattled by any of them. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered strategy. That was exactly what I needed. I laid it out for him in about 20 minutes. The messages, the timeline, Julian Steele, the fact that I've been functioning as the primary caregiver for Caleb since the day we brought him home from the hospital. Harding listened without interrupting, made notes on a yellow legal pad, and asked 3 questions when I was done. Was the house in both names? Was there any property held solely in my name? And had I documented my caregiving role anywhere verifiable? The house was joint. The rental property in Portugal, a 2-bedroom apartment in Porto that I'd inherited from my uncle 4 years before Norma and I even met, was in my name alone, held in trust. And as for documentation, I told him about the pediatric records. He set his pen down and looked at me. "How many of Dr. Brewster's appointments have you attended?" "All of them," I said. 14 visits. Norma came to one, the 2-month checkup. Harding wrote something down and underlined it twice. "Give me a copy of every record," he said. "Every single one." I left his office with a clear list of next steps and something I hadn't walked in with a plan. Travis met me downstairs at a coffee shop on the corner. He was already at a table when I got there, 2 cups waiting. He looked at my face and nodded slowly. "How'd it go?" "Good," I said, sitting down. "It went good. You tell him everything worth telling." Travis wrapped both hands around his cup. He'd been through his own divorce 3 years back, a brutal one involving a wife who'd burned through their joint savings before he'd known what was happening. He knew this terrain. "What about Julian?" he asked quietly. That was the part that still sat wrong in my chest. Not the betrayal itself. I was past the initial shock of that, but the specific shape of it. Julian Steele had reached out to me on a Thursday afternoon 14 months ago with a polite, well-written LinkedIn message. Explained he was transitioning out of a contract role and looking for a foothold in cloud infrastructure consulting. Said he'd heard good things about my work through a mutual connection. I had spent 40 minutes on the phone with him that same week. I'd talk him up to our vendor liaison. I'd written a recommendation that helped get him a contract with a firm in our partner network. I'd done all of that because it costs nothing to help someone who's trying to build something. He had used that access to spend the better part of 4 months in a hotel room with my wife. I took a slow sip of coffee. "I'm not doing anything to Julian yet," I told Travis. "But I know he's married. His wife's name is Cassandra. I looked him up last night." Travis went still. "Are you thinking about telling her?" "I'm thinking about a lot of things," I said. "In the right order." The right order mattered. Harding had been clear about that. Don't move until you have everything documented. Because once Norma knew I knew, the dynamic would change, and not in my favor. So I spent the next 5 days doing what I did best, working the system methodically, without emotion. I requested a full copy of Caleb's pediatric records from Dr. Brewster's office. No explanation needed. Parents are entitled to their child's records. I pulled 3 months of credit card statements and found exactly what I'd half expected: charges that didn't belong. Spa appointments, a boutique hotel bar downtown, a clothing purchase at a store Norma had told me was too expensive, a medical aesthetics clinic that she'd billed as a work event, small amounts individually, staggering in their accumulation. I built a folder, printed everything, organized it by date and category, and put in a lockbox in my car. Then I kept showing up every morning, making Caleb's breakfast, handling his naps, sitting at my desk until midnight when the workload demanded it. Norma kept coming home late. I kept saying nothing. On the 6th night, after Norma had gone to bed, I found Cassandra Steele on social media. She looked like a regular person, a woman with a job and a couple of friends, and no reason to expect her life was about to change. I sat with the screen open for a long time. Then I created a blank email account, attached 3 screenshots from the messages I'd photographed off Norma's phone, and wrote 4 sentences. "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because you deserve to know the truth. The man your husband has been meeting on Tuesday and Thursday evenings is not at work. I'm sorry." I sent it and closed the laptop. I wasn't sure how Cassandra Steele would react. That was out of my hands. What I knew was that the truth was moving now, and it was going to keep moving whether anyone tried to stop it or not. 2 weeks after I retained Fletcher Harding, Dr. Brewster's office called. I was at my desk running a cloud migration audit when the number came up on my phone. I knew the number. I'd called it more times than I could count. I stepped away from the laptop and answered. The scheduling nurse explained that Caleb's upcoming 9-month developmental assessment included a standard panel that required a complete parental medical history from both parents, blood type, genetic screening baseline, relevant hereditary conditions. She said they'd already sent a form to Norma's email 2 weeks ago and hadn't heard back. Could I follow up with her, or would I prefer to have the form sent directly to me as well? I told her to send them directly to me. I filled out my portion that evening. Family history, blood type, O positive, no significant hereditary conditions. Routine. I left Norma's section blank and put the form on the kitchen counter for her. She filled it out 2 days later without comment and left it next to the coffee maker. I picked it up, glanced at it, and stopped. Blood type. She'd written B positive. I'm O positive. I've known my blood type since I was 19 years old. I've never had any reason to think much about it. But there's a basic fact about blood type genetics that I happen to remember from a biology class 20 years ago. The kind of information that sits quietly in the back of your brain until it suddenly becomes the most important thing you've ever learned. Two O-positive parents cannot have a B-positive child. I stood in the kitchen for a full minute. Just stood there, form in hand, the refrigerator humming, Caleb asleep upstairs. Then I set the form down carefully, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. I spent an hour reading medical sites, genetics references, ABO blood type inheritance tables. Every source said the same thing. I read until I couldn't misinterpret it anymore. Then I ordered a home DNA paternity test through a medical laboratory service. Next day, shipping. I used my work credit card, the one Norma had no visibility into, and had it delivered to Travis's address. Travis dropped it off on his lunch break the next day. He didn't ask questions. He set the package on my kitchen counter, squeezed my shoulder once, and left. That was Travis. He knew when words were useless. The collection process was straightforward. A cheek swab from me, a gentle swab inside Caleb's mouth while he was distracted with a teething ring, both samples sealed and sent back the same afternoon. The results window was 5 to 7 business days. I went back to work. I fed Caleb dinner. I gave him his bath, read him 2 books, got him down by 8:40. I did every single thing I would have done on any other evening. But something had shifted in the architecture of how I was holding myself together. I'd spent weeks operating on suspicion and evidence of betrayal. Now I was waiting on something different. Something that had nothing to do with Norma's choices and everything to do with whether the 9-month-old boy I had been getting up for every single night of his life was mine. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. I was alone in the house. Norma at work, Caleb napping. The lab results came as a PDF to my email, but the physical report arrived the same afternoon, forwarded from Travis. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. I read the result once. Then I set it face down on the table and pressed both palms flat against the wood and breathed. Caleb was not my biological son. I sat there for a long time, not crying, not breaking anything, just sitting with the weight of it, which was considerable. The boy upstairs, the one who grabbed my finger when I lifted him, the one who recognized my voice before he recognized anything else. He was not mine by blood. That changed things. Not how I felt about him in that moment, but it changed things. The morning after I got the DNA results, I called Fletcher Harding before 8. He picked up on the second ring. I told him the number, 0% probability of paternity, and there was a brief silence on his end. Not surprised exactly. More like a man recalibrating the weight of what he was holding. That changes the custody picture significantly, he said. In your favor. I hadn't slept. I'd spent most of the night sitting at my desk going through bank records and credit card statements. Not because I needed more evidence, but because movement felt better than stillness. What I found during those hours confirmed what I'd already suspected in the back of my mind for weeks. Norma had opened a secondary credit card 14 months ago. I'd never known about it. It was in her name alone, linked to a different email address. I found the statements through a joint financial account that had been used as a backup payment source 3 times when her card hit its limit. The charges were meticulous in their pettiness. A spa in Cherry Creek that she'd visited 11 times in 4 months. 2 restaurant charges at a place downtown that ran $200 a visit. A boutique on Larimer Street. A medical aesthetics clinic in Greenwood Village that listed facial rejuvenation services as their specialty. $19,400 over 14 months. I printed every statement, put them in a folder with everything else. When I met Harding at his office that Thursday afternoon, I set the folder on his desk and let him work through it. He read quietly, occasionally making a note, occasionally pausing on a page longer than the others. When he finished, he looked up. The Portugal property, he said. You mentioned it was inherited. Before the marriage. 4 years before, I told him. My uncle's estate. It's held in a trust that predates the marriage by 3 years. Never commingled with joint finances. Harding nodded slowly. Her attorney is going to argue it became a marital asset because you drew income from it during the marriage. That's their play. We'll counter with the trust documentation and the inheritance records. He set his pen down. What about the pediatric records? I slid a separate folder across the desk. 14 visits to Dr. Brewster's office. My name on 13 of the sign-in records. Norma's name on 1. The 2-month checkup, back when we still operated like a functioning family. Each visit had a clinical note. Each note had a date, a physician signature, and an attending parent field. Harding studied the records for a long moment. I want a written statement from Dr. Brewster, he said. Factual, not editorial. Just what the records reflect. I'll call his office today, I said. One more thing. Harding looked at me directly. The DNA results establish that you are not Caleb's biological father. Legally, that affects your parental rights and obligations. But it also affects hers, and the biological father's. His name is Julian Steele. Yes. Once we file, his paternity becomes a matter of legal record. He will be responsible for support. He will not be able to walk away from this. Harding allowed himself a small, even expression. People who behave the way he behaved tend to find that the consequences follow them. I drove home, made Caleb's lunch, and called Dr. Brewster's office. The scheduling nurse put me through to the office manager, who confirmed that Dr. Brewster would provide a factual written statement based on the clinical records. She said she'd have it ready within the week. That evening, after Caleb was asleep, I sat on the back porch with a glass of water and thought about the next step. Norma still didn't know what was coming. She'd been coming home late, moving through the house with the easy confidence of someone who believed they were ahead of the game. She wasn't. The following Tuesday, I filed for divorce. Harding's office submitted the paperwork at 9 in the morning. By noon, Norma had been served at her office. She called me 4 times before I answered. When I did, she was breathing hard, voice tight and high. You filed, she said, like it was an accusation. I did. I told her. Clark, we need to talk about this. You can't just. My attorney will be in contact with yours, I said. That's how this works now. She went quiet for a moment. Then her voice shifted, still hard, but calculating. You think I'm just going to walk away? You think I'm going to let you take everything? I think, I said carefully, that you should find a good attorney. I ended the call, went back to my desk, and finished the workday. Norma found her attorney within a week. His name was Preston Holt, a family law practitioner out of an office in Highlands Ranch who had a reputation, according to Travis, for aggressive opening positions. He filed a response to our divorce petition that was 18 pages long and contained, among other things, a claim on the Porto apartment. Harding called me the morning it landed. He read the relevant section aloud over the phone, his voice unhurried. Norma's attorney was arguing that because the rental income from the Portuguese property had flowed through our joint household finances during the marriage, the property itself had been integrated into the marital estate and was subject to equitable distribution. Is that going to work? I asked. No, Harding said flatly. The property was held in a trust established before your marriage. Income from a separate asset flowing through a joint account doesn't transform the asset itself. We have the trust deed, the inheritance documentation, and 3 years of premarital ownership records. Their argument falls apart the moment we produce the paperwork. I exhaled. What else? He paused. Her attorney is also arguing that your remote work arrangement constituted a form of financial control, that you structured the household finances in a way that limited Norma's economic independence. I sat with that for a moment. I paid for everything, I said. The house, the cars, every bill. I covered her credit card every month. I supported her career, took her to conferences, covered the childcare gap so she could advance at work. I know, Harding said, and we have documentation for all of it. Bank records, tax returns, your income versus hers. Their narrative doesn't survive contact with the actual numbers. The first hearing was 3 weeks later. I sat beside Harding at the plaintiff's table and watched Norma's attorney stand up and deliver what amounted to a prepared speech about power imbalance and career suppression. He used the word autonomy 4 times. He suggested that Norma had been in a household where her professional aspirations had been systematically subordinated to her husband's preferences. I kept my face neutral and let him finish. Then Harding stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He placed a single document on the table in front of the judge, a summary of household financial contributions over 5 years of marriage. My income, Norma's income. Who paid what? Mr. Grimsby contributed 83% of total household income over the course of this marriage, Harding said. He funded his wife's attendance at 4 professional development conferences. He covered the full cost of childcare, home maintenance, and living expenses while simultaneously managing a demanding remote career. He was the attending parent at 13 of 14 pediatric appointments for the couple's infant child. He set a second document alongside the first. This is a certified statement from Dr. Rick Brewster, the child's pediatrician. I direct the court's attention to the fourth paragraph. The judge read it. Then she looked up at Norma's attorney with an expression that suggested she was not finding the autonomy argument particularly persuasive. Norma, seated across the room, looked straight ahead. Her jaw was set, but I watched her hands folded on the table in front of her, and I could see the tension in them, the knuckles slightly white, the fingers pressing together just a little too hard. She'd walked into this courtroom expecting to win on narrative. What she found instead was documentation. After the hearing, in the corridor outside, Norma caught up with me before I reached the elevator. Harding stepped slightly to the side, close enough to hear, but giving us a foot of space. She kept her voice low. You think this is over? I think it's going the way it's going, I said. I deserve half of everything we built together, Clark. I looked at her steadily. You deserve exactly what the records show you contributed, I said, which your attorney now knows. She pressed her lips together. For a moment, something moved across her face. Not remorse, not guilt, but the particular frustration of someone who has just realized their strategy isn't working. Then she turned and walked away down the corridor, heels sharp against the tile. Harding appeared at my shoulder. That went well, he said quietly. I watched her go. Yeah, I said. It did. I've been staying at Travis's place for 3 weeks when Norma's carefully constructed life began to fall apart on its own. The first sign was Julian. Cassandra Steele had received my anonymous email on a Wednesday evening. By Friday, according to Travis, who had a mutual contact at a firm Julian contracted through, Cassandra had confronted her husband, moved out of their house in Aurora, and retained an attorney. Julian's consulting contract was quietly terminated the following week after the circumstances of how he'd obtained his references came to light through the internal review his firm ran when Cassandra's attorney started asking questions. The man I'd recommended. The man I vouched for. Gone from the professional network I'd helped him enter, marriage in pieces, reputation in the industry already cooling. I felt nothing about that. The machine I'd set in motion was running exactly as designed. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly Norma would realize she was alone. She'd assumed, I think, that Julian would be her next chapter, that once the marriage ended, the affair would simply transition into something legitimate. That's the story people like her tell themselves, that the relationship waiting on the other side of the wreckage is real, that it was worth the cost. Julian disappearing had apparently not been part of that story. Travis was the one who told me she'd been calling him. Not me, but Travis, asking how I was doing, feeling out whether there was any softness in my position. Travis had been pleasant, non-committal, and immediately relayed every word to me afterward. She sounds rattled, he said. Good, I said. The call I did not expect came on a Tuesday night at 11:40. I was in bed at Travis's, not quite asleep, when my phone lit up with Norma's name. I stared at it for a moment. We were deep in the legal process. Her attorney had been in contact with Harding twice that week alone. She had no business calling me directly. I answered. Caleb has a fever. Her voice was tight, stripped of its usual edges. It's 103.2. I don't know what to do. I was out of bed before she finished the sentence. I didn't think about the divorce, about the legal proceedings, about what it would or wouldn't mean. I thought about a 9-month-old boy running 103-degree fever at 11:40 at night with a woman who had attended exactly one of his pediatric appointments. Have you given him anything? I asked, pulling on my jeans. I gave him children's Tylenol. I think. The right dose. I looked it up. What was the dose on the box for his weight? Silence. She didn't know his current weight. I did. 21 pounds, 2 ounces, from his last visit to Dr. Brewster. I walked her through the correct dosage, grabbed my keys, and was in the car in under 4 minutes. When I got to the house, my house, the one I'd moved out of 3 weeks ago, Norma opened the door looking like she hadn't slept in days. She'd been crying recently. I registered that and moved past it. I went straight upstairs to Caleb's room. He was in his crib, flushed and miserable, making the low continuous sound he made when he was truly uncomfortable rather than just irritable. I picked him up. He turned his face into my shoulder immediately, a reflex so instinctive it bypassed every complicated thing I was carrying in my chest and went straight to something older and simpler than all of it. I checked his temperature myself. 103.4. Rising slightly. We're going to Children's Hospital, I said, coming back downstairs with Caleb against my chest. Norma grabbed her bag without argument. The drive took 11 minutes. The ER triage nurse got us back, quickly giving Caleb's age and temperature. The attending physician, a young woman who moved with the efficient calm of someone very good at her job, examined him thoroughly, asked a detailed history of symptoms, medications administered, and known allergies. I answered everything. Every question, every date, every relevant detail from every previous visit. When the doctor asked about his ear infection history, I cited the 2 previous mild infections, the antibiotic used, and the fact that he'd tolerated it without reaction. When she asked about allergies, I named the formula sensitivity and the alternative we used. Norma stood against the wall and said nothing. The doctor looked at me once, just a glance, quick and assessing, and I saw her register the picture. She didn't comment. She ordered a blood panel, administered 4 fluids, and had Caleb comfortable and sleeping within 90 minutes. The diagnosis was a viral infection, not dangerous if monitored, but requiring attention and a follow-up with his pediatrician within 24 hours. She gave me the discharge instructions. Not Norma. Me. Because I was the one who had answered every question. We sat in the waiting area while the discharge paperwork was processed. Norma had her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor. After a long silence, she said quietly, "Thank you for coming." I didn't answer right away. I looked at Caleb, asleep in the infant carrier against my chest, fever already breaking with the medication on board. "I came for him," I said. "Not for you." She nodded. She didn't argue. I brought Caleb back to Travis's that night, with a portable crib and enough supplies to manage the next 48 hours. Travis didn't ask questions. He just moved things around to make room. The following morning, I called Fletcher Harding at 8:15. "I need to file for emergency custody," I said. "Last night gave me what I need." Harding was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Tell me everything that happened in that ER." So I did. And by 4 o'clock that afternoon, the emergency custody petition was filed. The custody hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after I filed the emergency petition. In the meantime, the divorce proceedings continued on their parallel track, and Julian Steele's situation continued deteriorating in ways that were not my doing, but that I followed with a certain quiet attention. Cassandra had filed for divorce within 10 days of receiving my email. Her attorney had requested Julian's financial disclosure as part of the proceedings, and what that disclosure revealed, according to Travis, who had maintained his contact at Julian's former firm, was that Julian had been using a personal credit card to fund what could generously be called a parallel life. Hotel stays, restaurant charges, gifts, the same category of expenditure Norma had been running on her secret card, except Julian had been doing it while also failing to meet 2 mortgage payments on the house he shared with Cassandra. His consulting contract was gone. His marriage was gone. And now a family court was about to establish him as the legal father of a child he had apparently not planned for and certainly hadn't volunteered to support. Harding filed the paternity documentation as part of the custody proceedings. The DNA result was entered into the record. Julian Steele was formally identified as Caleb's biological father. His attorney, a man who looked, according to Harding, like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, attempted to argue that Julian's paternity should be addressed separately from the custody question. The judge declined to separate them. Julian was ordered to pay child support. The figure the court arrived at, based on his income history, was substantial enough that his attorney visibly winced when it was read aloud. I was not in that particular hearing. Harding represented my interests. But Travis was there and called me afterward with the details. And I sat in my car in the parking garage of a downtown Denver office building and listened and felt something that wasn't satisfaction exactly. More like the particular relief of watching a structure that was always going to fall finally hit the ground. The custody hearing itself was on a Thursday morning in early December. I sat beside Harding at the plaintiff's table. Norma sat across the room with Preston Holt. She was dressed neatly, composed on the surface, but she'd been served with Dr. Brewster's written statement 2 days earlier, and I could see in the set of her shoulders that she knew what was coming. The social worker assigned to the case presented her findings first. She conducted 2 home visits, one at Norma's residence, one at the apartment I'd recently moved into, a 2-bedroom place in Washington Park that I'd set up specifically with Caleb in mind. Proper crib, child-proof spaces, a pediatric first aid kit that the social worker noted in her report had been comprehensively stocked. Her conclusion was measured but clear. The child had demonstrated a strong primary attachment to the father, consistent with the caregiving history documented in the medical records. Then Dr. Brewster's statement was read into the record. 13 of 14 appointments. Primary medical contact. The attending parent at every sick visit, every immunization, every developmental check. Preston Holt made his argument that Norma was the mother, that she had a right to primary custody, that her work schedule had necessitated the current arrangement, but did not reflect her capacity or her commitment. He used the word bond for times and cited no documentation. Harding's response was 3 minutes long and consisted almost entirely of reading numbers from the record. Then they brought Caleb in. A court-appointed child welfare coordinator carried him in. He'd been with a supervised caregiver in an adjacent room during the hearing. The coordinator brought him into the courtroom, and I watched from across the room as he processed where he was. New environment, unfamiliar ceiling lights, too many adults. He looked around, squirming slightly. Then he found my face. He went still for 1 second, the way babies do when they locate something familiar in an uncertain place. Then both arms came up. The universal signal. The one that meant only one thing. He wanted me. The coordinator glanced at the judge. The judge nodded. The coordinator brought him to me. I held him against my chest, felt his weight settle the way it always did. Immediate, trusting, completely without hesitation. And I looked at the ceiling for a moment because I needed a second to stay composed. Across the room, Norma watched. Her face was very still. I looked back down at Caleb. He had one fist wrapped around the collar of my jacket and was studying the room from the security of my shoulder. Perfectly calm now. The judge made her preliminary ruling 20 minutes later. Primary physical custody to the father, pending final divorce proceedings. Norma would have supervised visitation on weekends, with a review in 90 days. Preston Holt said something about appeals. Harding listened politely and said nothing. I walked out of that courtroom with Caleb in my arms and Travis one step behind me. In the elevator, Travis put a hand on my shoulder and didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The weeks between the custody ruling and the final divorce hearing had a particular quality to them, a kind of compressed stillness, like the air before a storm that has already decided where it's going to land. I knew the outcome. Harding knew the outcome. I think, on some level, Norma knew it too. That didn't stop her from trying. Preston Holt filed 2 additional motions in the 3 weeks before the final hearing. The first was a renewed claim on the Porto property, recycling the same argument about marital integration that had already failed once. Harding dismissed it in a 4-page response that referenced the same trust documentation we'd produced in October. The second motion was a request for a vocational evaluation, an attempt to argue that because I worked remotely, my actual earning capacity was unclear and therefore the financial settlement should be recalculated. Harding handled that one with something close to amusement. My tax returns for the past 4 years were filed as exhibits. The earning capacity question answered itself. What Harding couldn't fully prepare me for was Norma herself. She called me on a Sunday evening, 9 days before the final hearing. I considered not answering. Then I picked up, because I had learned by then that the things you avoid have a way of finding you at worse moments. I want to talk, she said. Not through attorneys. Just us. We're 11 days from the end of this, I said. Whatever you want to say it to Harding. Clark. Her voice shifted, softer, more careful. I've been thinking. About everything. About what we had before all of this happened. I waited. I think we gave up too fast, she continued. I mean people make mistakes. Marriages can survive things if both people are willing to. Norma, I said. She stopped. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. I kept my voice level. What exactly are you proposing? A pause. Then, carefully, I think we could try something different. Something more open. A different kind of structure, where we both have more freedom, but we stay a family for Caleb. There it was. The reframe. The betrayal dressed up as evolution. The affair retroactively converted into a lifestyle choice. And me invited to accept it as the price of keeping the family together. I felt nothing sharp or hot about it. Just a clean, final clarity. Let me make sure I understand, I said quietly. You want me to agree to an arrangement where you have the freedom to do exactly what you've already been doing, except now I know about it. and in exchange you'll stay in the house. Silence. The answer is no, I said. It was no the moment you made your first choice, and it hasn't changed since. Don't call me again outside of the legal process. I ended the call and set the phone on my desk. Travis was in the kitchen making dinner and had heard most of it through the open door. He appeared in the doorway, spatula in hand, and looked at me. She played the open relationship card, I said. He shook his head slowly. Unbelievable. Predictable, I said. And meant it. The following Thursday, Norma arrived at Harding's office for a mandatory pre-hearing settlement discussion. I was already there when she came in. She sat across the conference table from me for the first time since the custody hearing, and I watched her try to find something in my expression she could use, some residual warmth, some opening, some evidence that the man she'd spent 5 years managing was still manageable. She found nothing. I made sure of that. She looked, for the first time in all of this, genuinely uncertain. Not about the legal outcome. Holt had presumably briefed her on that clearly enough. Uncertain about me. About the fact that the person sitting across from her was not reacting the way she'd expected or needed him to react. That uncertainty was the only thing I gave her. The settlement discussion lasted 90 minutes. The Porto property stayed in my name. The marital assets were divided according to actual contribution. The custody arrangement from the preliminary ruling was confirmed as permanent. Julian Steele's child support obligation was already established and would continue independent of the divorce. Norma signed where Holt indicated. I signed where Harding indicated. We did not look at each other when we left. The final divorce hearing was brief, 45 minutes, procedural, the judge reviewing the signed settlement and confirming that both parties had entered it without coercion. She asked 2 questions, received 2 answers, and signed the decree. It was over. Before we left the courtroom, Norma's attorney spoke to Harding about the first supervised visitation, the logistics, the schedule, the handoff location. Standard administrative business. I stood slightly apart and let the attorneys handle it. Norma approached me. The attorneys were still talking. She stopped a few feet away and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Something unguarded. Something that didn't have an agenda behind it. He's going to grow up not knowing you were his father, she said. Is that what you want? I looked at her steadily. The courtroom was emptying around us. Voices and footsteps receding toward the corridor. Caleb is going to grow up knowing exactly who was there, I said. Every night. Every appointment. Every time he needed someone at 3 in the morning. He's going to know that because I'm going to be there for every single one of those moments going forward, same as I always was. I held her gaze. What he knows about you is going to depend entirely on what you choose to do from here. She swallowed. Her jaw tightened. But she didn't have an answer. Not a real one. And after a moment she looked away. I picked up my jacket from the chair and walked out. Travis was waiting in the corridor. He fell in a step beside me, without a word, as we headed for the elevator. 4 months later, I was sitting at my desk on a Tuesday morning in April, Denver skyline visible through the window, coffee going cold beside the keyboard. Caleb was in his bouncer 3 feet away, working very seriously on destroying a soft toy that had already lost one ear to his determination. He'd started pulling himself upright on furniture and had opinions, strong ones, about which foods were acceptable and which were not. The Porto apartment had just renewed its tenant lease for another year. My income was solid. My head was clear in a way it hadn't been in longer than I could accurately measure. Caleb looked up from the toy, found my face, and broke into the grin he'd recently discovered. Wide, toothless, completely unself-conscious, aimed at me like I was the best thing he'd seen all morning. I pushed the laptop aside and picked him up. Whatever came next, I'd figure it out. I always had.